Thanks for tuning in to Soundwell Guitar. Today's lesson is going to be about reading and playing eighth notes. Okay, the eighth note. The eighth note is a shorter value than all of the other notes that we've done on previous lessons. If you remember, we had the whole note, it got 4 beats. We had the half note, got 2. And then we had the quarter note, got 1. We're getting smaller now. The eighth notes get half of a beat. Half of a beat. Now that's a tough concept for some people at first, because up until this point, all the notes were played on beats. We tap our foot, the note gets played on the foot tap. Well, some of these eighth notes will appear in between the beats, and that's what makes them tricky. More often than not, when you get eighth notes, you'll get the first one will be on the beat, and so that's easy enough. You play that on the beat. But it's usually followed by one or more, and the one after the one that gets the beat is the one that's not on a beat, and that can be very tricky for some people. When you play it, one of the things that I've found that's beneficial is to feel the foot lift, because I recommend tapping your foot to the rhythm of the music that you're reading and playing. And then if you are tapping your foot, then when your foot lifts to go to the next foot tap, that's the point where you're right in between the first beat and then the next beat. So if you can feel that space, that's where that next eighth note would be played. It's called the off beat. They sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. You could see as I moved my hand like that, that's showing you the way the foot would tap. And I was tapping my foot with it too. I always try to engage my body in the rhythm of tunes when I'm performing, playing, or even just reading music. Because if it's just your hands, if your music is only just coming from your hands, chances are it's going to sound really stiff and might not even be quite right. Because pitch is heard, but rhythm is felt. I mean, typically when people are listening to music, if they're not actually playing it, they tend to dance to it, or they at least bob their head or they tap their foot. This is sort of a natural inclination that we get into with music. And so, yeah, if we engage our whole body, or at least get that foot tapping really decisively, we can start to feel where the offbeat is as the foot lifts. There's also a way that we can count it. We've always counted the beats 1, 2, 3, 4. What we're going to do now, though, when we have eighth notes, to also feel that offbeat, we're going to say "and" on the offbeat. So it's like if we're tapping our foot, and I'll clap to the beats. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Now let's put ands in between those claps or foot taps. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Then we know where to put them. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Let's talk now about what eighth notes actually look like. Eighth notes, they look a lot like the quarter note, except they've got this little flag on them. And when that flag is on there, was the eighth note is presented by itself, it tends to kind of curl up on the side like that. And that's what an eighth note looks like by itself. But like I said earlier, eighth notes are usually followed by more eighth notes. And so when they're right next to each other, we connect those flags. It just looks better. It doesn't change the way that it sounds at all. It's just to make it look neater on the page. Okay, so let's get into our first reading exercise, playing eighth notes. We're going to start out simple. We're just going to do 4 measures, and we'll start out with the whole note, then we'll do a couple half notes, then we'll do 4 quarter notes, and then we're going to do a measure with 8 eighth notes. Remember, when you get to the eighth notes, it does not mean to speed up. Eighth notes, yes, there's more per beat. There's 2 now per beat, as opposed to like quarter notes, 1 note per beat. So there's more notes. So I guess that means your fingers have to move faster to play them. But it doesn't mean the tune's sped up. It's really important to remember that. If I'm playing quarter notes, I go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I go to the eighth notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. That's the same tempo. So let's do this exercise so you can see how the tempo will not change when we get to the eighth notes. That foot tap, that pulse, it's going to stay the same slow, steady pace that we started out with. We're just playing more notes per beat. Oh, I want to mention that when we do these studies, I'm going to use the red arrow like I've used in previous lessons. And in previous lessons, I hope you've seen them, otherwise this video might be kind of confusing. But I've always used that arrow to point at the note that we are playing. And if there are beats after that but not notes, I didn't use the arrow to point at where those beats are. I just let it continue to point at the note that's ringing out. So that's all it did, is it followed the notes that we were playing. I'm going to keep doing that, but I thought about with the red arrow and the eighth notes, I don't want the arrow to point at every single eighth note, because it would kind of look like all the eighth notes are getting a beat, and it might cause you to speed up your count. All I'm going to do is point at the eighth notes that get a beat, and then the eighth note that will follow the one that gets the beat. The arrow's not going to point at it. It's just going to keep pointing at the one that we played before it, and then we get to the next beat, it'll point at that one. So again, it's only pointing at the eighth notes that are on the beat. I hope that's not confusing, but I think that's going to be the easiest way to do it, or actually less confusing. It's not about ease, it's just, I think it'll look better. So here we go. We're going to play our first exercise with using eighth notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Okay, our next exercise isn't technically a song. I got it out of a children's guitar method that was where it was teaching eighth notes, and I kind of wish that I had learned this one when I was trying to learn how to read eighth notes, because it really does seem to help. I've used it with a lot of students, and the song was just called "I Love Eating Doughnuts," and the idea is to make a phrase that sounded like eighth notes. It worked like this: if you say "I love eating donuts," but you do it rhythmically, and like an eighth note, so it's like 4 eighth notes, then 2 quarter notes, like 1 and 2 and 3, 4. And it would sound like this when we say the word, the words, the name of the song, "I Love Eating Doughnuts." I love eating donuts. Again, kind of silly, but I think it's effective. I've used this with a lot of my students, and then they seem to get the idea how eighth notes are counted. So here we go. We're going to do our exercise, or song, if you will, called "I Love Eating Doughnuts." And I am going to not count the beats this time. I'm actually going to say the lyrics to the tune. Hopefully then you'll get the idea with the eighth note count. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. I love eating doughnuts. I love eating doughnuts. I love eating doughnuts. I love eating doughnuts. Yeah, I love eating donuts. Kind of silly. Felt kind of weird doing that one in front of a camera, but if it helped you, then I'm glad that I did it. All right, here we go. Here's our next exercise. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2 and 3, 4 and 1 and 2, 3 and 4. 1, 2, 3 and 4 and 1, 2 and 3, 4. Okay, next exercise, we're not going to just play E. We're going to start mixing in some of the other notes that we've learned how to play with some half notes and some quarter notes and eighth notes. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3 and 4. 1 and 2 and 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3, 4. Okay, this next one, I think a lot of people want to learn this one, familiar song to pretty much everybody, the Happy Birthday song. And it's in 3/4 count. And if you thought you couldn't count eighth notes before you saw this video, but you sang the song Happy Birthday, well, truth is you actually do know how to count eighth notes because the Happy Birthday song has them in it. All right, when I play this one, I'm actually not going to count out loud with it because we're getting into songs, and I don't think you want to. I think you'd rather hear the melody than hear me count over it. And I think with the previous exercises, you got the idea with the 1, 2, 3, 4, and the eighth notes 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So here we go. Happy Birthday song. 1, 2, 3. Just as a side point, as far as playing this, I'm counting it, and it's real stiff, and you're probably like, that kind of doesn't sound like Happy Birthday. People are a little bit more joyful with it, and you take some liberties, and so here's kind of an idea. If you wanted to play around with it and actually play it at somebody's birthday, don't be afraid to take some liberties like people normally do with this one and make it maybe sound a little more like this. Okay, our next tune/exercise in reading eighth notes is in 3/4. It's an old folk song called The Ash Grove. 1, 2, 3. So you might have noticed on the Ash Grove when we got to that note F on the 4th string, 3rd fret. Previous lessons we talked about how that's a bass note that the thumb typically plays. Don't feel like you have to use your thumb for that, just to stick with some hard and fast rule that I might have said in a previous lesson. It's okay in this context because all of it is almost exclusively index and middle. You can just play that F with your index or middle. Probably the index would be the best in this case. Anyway. Won't get too into detail with that. It's pretty simple. Okay, our next tune is the classic song Bingo. It's about the farmer's dog named Bingo. I loved this one when I was a kid. A lot of my students like it too, so I'm sure you probably remember it from grade school. Maybe you played it on your recorder or something like that. And this one is in the time signature 2/4, so it's 2 beats per measure, just 1, 2, 1, 2, and so on. Here we go. Bingo. 1, 2. That's it for today's lessons on eighth notes. Just continue practicing the exercises that we did. And if you have access to other sheet music that has some just basic single note melodies that use eighth notes, I recommend that you use those. Try to read different pieces of music every day. This is what will really help you develop the skill and for you to get really solid at it. I like the exercises that I've provided on these lessons, but I definitely think that more can be really helpful for somebody to get really good at reading. So if you can get your hands on just a basic note reading method and go into some of those studies, I highly recommend it. But stick around, we've got more lessons to come. I'm still going to be putting out some more lessons in this finger picking thing and with the note reading. We still got a lot of ground to cover on that, so stay tuned.